the distinguished guests, particularly the keynote addresser, Mr. Ashok Pavadia, Mr. James, ladies and gentlemen present here. I start from where Mr. Ashok has left. He sat down by saying, please don't drag me into controversies. I have given you the ideas. I have raised the issues. It is for all of us, including him, to deliberate upon it, discuss it, and come to our individual and then collective conclusion so that the humanity can forward or moved ahead. Pardon me, Mr. James, I would address a minute or two my countrymen in my national language, which may not be known to you. वक्त चलता रहा, जिंदगी सिमटती गई. वक्त चलता रहा, जिंदगी सिमटती गई. दोस्त बढ़ते गए, दोस्ती घटती गई. And why it so happened? यूं तो भीड़ मेरे महफिलों में भी हुआ करती थी, लेकिन मैं सच बोलता रहा और लोग घटते गए. I have remained incarcerated and engaged for more than 26 years as judge, which I am not commenting on myself, but yes, it is a very, very rare distinction. It's a fairly long time that I have been in the business of judging, and the first thing that we do is that we apply self-restraint, which Mr. Ashok was applying. I think before we understand the complete theme, not understand, rather appreciate the complete theme and what I have been able to gather, because I was noting down the points when Mr. Ashok was speaking. There are a few components very important for our existence and governance, which we must very clearly understand. Not that I have understood it, throwing it before you. The first, ladies and gentlemen, is law itself. What's a law? Because no society can exist without law, no country can exist without law, no nation can exist without law. Then what is law? There are many complex definitions of law, which I don't think is meant for you and me. Rather than academics, we should be on the practical field. The law, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing but norms of governance of society. How I shall behave with my wife, how my wife shall treat me, these norms are called laws. How one neighbor will behave vis-a-vis another neighbor. What right my son will have as against me, or what obligation he will have as against me, or what rights and obligation I will have as against my son. This is nothing but norm, and these norms are defined as laws. There was a time when these norms were decided by kings and emperors for us. Today, by the process of election or electoral process, we are the ones who choose our own norms. Let us be very clear. We send our elected representative in the legislature not to throw microphones, not to throw chappals, but to make legislation, meaning thereby laws which will govern every one of us. And because of the fact that a society never remains static, it keeps changing. Our outlook keeps changing, our perception keeps changing, and with every change in our perception and outlook, there is a change in law. Many a times, even without an amendment of the law. Two quick examples. One, without any disrespect to any medical practitioner, there was a time when the doctors in the society were treated as almost demigods. Nobody ever disputed or doubted their integrity. The result was that if an eyewitness appeared in a court and said that I have seen the accused stabbing the deceased by means of a dagger on his stomach, and the medical opinion is that there was no injury on the stomach. The deceased dies because of an injury which was found to have been caused at the back of his head, and that was not caused by any pointed weapon but by a blunt weapon. So there is a contradiction. And because of the fact that the society had very deep trust and faith in the doctors, the law was that the doctor has no reason to lie, and therefore in such kind of a conflict, the benefit must go to the accused and accused must be held as innocent. Today, ladies and gentlemen, when we go to a doctor and he will ask us, please get your urine examined, your blood test done, and so on and so forth, taking the prescription in hand, we start wondering how much commission is he going to receive. Mind you, it's the same profession, but our perception has changed. Has it resulted into any change in the law or in the norms of our governance? Yes, it has. Because the Supreme Court has to ultimately say that medical evidence cannot always be treated as the touchstone for testing the veracity of an ocular evidence, that means eyewitnesses' account of the occurrence, and therefore if there is a conflict between the two, the medical evidence on the one hand and the eyewitnesses' account on the other hand, the court cannot take the easy path of acquitting the accused. It has to determine who between the two of them is telling the truth. If the court has reasons to believe that it is the eyewitness who is telling the truth, notwithstanding the contrary medical opinion, there is no reason for the accused not to be convicted, even if the medical evidence is to the contrary. It is only in such circumstances that the court is unable to decide where lies the truth, that the accused should be acquitted. No change in the Evidence Act. I said I will give two examples. The other one is from the United Kingdom. The definition of rape by and large in United Kingdom has been unlawful sexual intercourse by a man with a woman without her consent or against her will. I am repeating. Unlawful sexual intercourse by a man with a woman without her consent or against her will. The question which the court faced was whether within the parameter of this definition can it be said that a husband can be held guilty of rape if he happens to have sex with his wife without her consent or against her will. The answer of the court was that this word unlawful has to be read outside the institution of marriage, because by marriage a woman surrenders to the husband, and therefore if he has sex with his wife even against her will or without her consent, it will not amount to rape. Times changed, people perception changed, outlook changed, and the same court happens to again come across a case where they had to take a decision. And this time they said, gone are those days when men and women were not equals. Today they are equal partners in the institution of marriage, and therefore this word unlawful shall be read within the institution of marriage. And if it is read within the institution of marriage, then it will mean that even if a husband has sex with his wife without her consent or against her will, it will amount to rape. I don't know how many of you know that there was a time when the United States Supreme Court had held slavery as constitutionally valid. We can't imagine American Supreme Court today taking such a view. I happened to fly from Heathrow Airport by British Airways flight to New Delhi. Because of the restrictions which had been imposed on international flight, the kind of extremism or terrorism that we had been facing in the northeast and Jammu and Kashmir, I reported 3 hours before the scheduled departure of the flight. I got checked in and waited for the security call to happen. There was no security call. So from 3 hours it came to 2 hours. I was getting impatient, but still I patiently waited. Then it was 1 hour. And then it was taking less than 1 hour. I could not resist myself. I walked over to one of the counters and asked the lady at the counter, "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm a passenger bound by British Airways flight to New Delhi. Would you please tell me when will you announce the security check?" Do you know what was the answer? She looked at me with great concern and asked me, "Sir, do you have any security threat?" Then I realized that there is no frisking which we were undergoing. But came September 11, even the defense minister of India was stripped before passing him the security so that he could enter the United States. The former president of India had to be stripped. It's a different matter that after a couple of days they apologized for having behaved in the manner in which they had behaved with the former president of India. What makes the change? The laws change depending upon the needs of the society. When we were suffering in the northeast or Jammu and Kashmir, they were telling us what is human rights. And when it came to them, then a cop in UK shoots 2 bullets into the head of a person. Why? Because to him he appeared to be a terrorist. This is just after following the blast in the tube in England. And this is what I'm trying to say, that there cannot be any stability unless and until the conditions of the society is stable. And the human rights, let us understand very clearly. Assume a situation where there was no law, no norms, nothing of the kind. We were almost living without any clothes, anything. No cover for men, no cover for women. If a man made a pass on a woman and wanted to sexually exploit her, could she have resisted? Ask yourself. Your conscience will tell you that no, that woman must have had the right of saying no and resist. Why? Because that's her dignity. So the right with which a person is born or which a person must have in order to enable him to live with dignity is nothing but human rights. It's not necessary for us to write theses. So whether it is the paramilitary forces, it is the police forces, it is armed forces, you must bear in mind that the right which this man is claiming is this right a right which we must have in order to enable him to survive or live, not merely exist as human being. Because the state cannot violate human rights. Very often we hear, what about the human rights of the armed forces? Very typical question. If I violate the human rights of a person in the armed forces cannot start violating my human rights. If they have the right, they have even the right to kill me. That's not the question. Nobody can defend the killing of any extremist by an army person. But the way army conduct itself has to be keeping in dignity of a human being in the society. Whether the society is of the Jammu and Kashmir or it is of any part of the Northeast. Now, and that's why sometimes I wonder, because as a student I had read a book by Felix Green. It was The Wall Has Two Sides. Because he was writing about China, which used to be for us an iron curtain country. And whatever good was happening there, and this is the one which Felix Green has narrated or related in his book. Now what the frustrating situation which comes out from the talks of Mr. Ashok is a reminder of Judge Bernard Shaw's comments in his Pygmalion, where he says that the law is equal for all of us, but we are not equal before the law. There is one law for the rich, another for the poor. One for the strong, another for the weak. And that is the dichotomy that we are facing. So the democracy, Mr. Ashok is right that perhaps the definition of democracy which was most acceptable being that of Abraham Lincoln is that it is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. But let us not go into definitions of democracy. Madam Manorama's question really starts me wondering what is the essence of democracy. The essence of democracy is, ladies and gentlemen, I presume that you would concur with me, is that we agree to disagree. I give you the right not to agree with my views of what I say, but you must also give me the honor and privilege of not agreeing with what you say or what your views are. So where this exchange of right exists, democracy exists. If this right does not exist, democracy does not exist. The best place to see this democracy would have ideally been perhaps the parliament and the state legislature, which we do not have. And that's why we see, instead of debates, chappals being thrown, microphone here it need not be fixed, because all of us are democrats. But the persons who are supposed to be Democrats, the microphone has to be kept fixed. And that is what is called institution. And that is what is called leadership. How you are running your institution. A person has to run his institution first. And when you can make the institution of the entire country run and run efficiently and in a manner in which it ought to be run, then that is the leadership which I infer is the leadership that our keynote addresser was trying to tell us. So the institutions are many. Now, a strong leadership has been said that by process it comes. That process is nobody is disputing. But ultimately the governance after the government has come to power, it's different. Unfortunately today for us, what we witness is not particularly in any particular country, but in better part of the world, is that the government is being identified with nation or state. I don't know how many of you have the experience of going to the court. You will find it is never government of Assam or government of UP or government of Delhi. It is always a state of Delhi. If it is the government of India, it is Union of India. Then what is the difference between the government and the state, or the government and the nation? A government is constituted by a political party or a combination of political parties. So the government keeps changing. But a state or nation cannot change. That's the difference. If supposing A party is in power, and anything is said by B party or against criticism made by B party or anything said against A by B party will be said as anti-national. Let us reverse the process. Someday B come to power and A sits in the opposition, then whatever A will say, whatever A will criticize, whatever A will say against B will all be anti-national, meaning thereby the entire nation is anti-national. And that's not nation. Nation is something far, far more larger than the government. Government will keep changing, it keeps coming, it keeps going. The nation will remain. And our loyalty has to be to the state, to the nation, not to a particular government. And that is how we will test the governance of a particular government. If we are committed to a leadership, because of the fact that it is a strong leadership, that by itself will not do, unless and until we know that yes, this leadership, apart from being a strong leadership, is a leadership which is leading to a correct path. I will give an example, perhaps at the cost of your valuable time, very precious time. There is a very, very interesting book written by Lord Denning. He has written many books. In this book, he has referred to the censorship which was enforced in England by the British government. So much so that you are not allowed to listen to the radio or the news of anyone other than the British news. So if the British news says that we have shot 5 aircrafts of Germany, German news will say we have shot 10 aircrafts of Britishers. He says, as an Englishman, we used to be very confused. We are like the truth. And we waited for Churchill to speak in Parliament because we knew that as a Prime Minister, when Churchill speaks in Parliament, he will not be able to lie. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, very, very coolly, very, very dispassionately, do we have the same kind of faith and confidence in our elected representative? I am not naming any individual, that he will not be lying when he speaks in the Parliament or he will speak in the Legislative Assembly. So this is the example of a good governance. And it is this kind of a government which will take decision which will be for the welfare of the people. How you test a strong leadership? Is this a strong leadership for the welfare of the people in general, irrespective of the fact as to whether that person has or has not given me vote? And same thing applies to the people also, irrespective of the fact whether I have been a person who has helped in the election of a party or not. If A is in power, it's my party. Any law which it has made is my law. It cannot be that it is A's law, so I will not apply. I will not abide by that law. That cannot be the concept. The institutions, as far as concerned, since I belong to judiciary, I must say a few words. The strength of the judiciary, ladies and gentlemen, lies in its own resilience. How much can it tolerate? You will be surprised to know that even the Lord Chancellor's decision was once set aside by the House of Lords on the ground that he was not qualified to sit as judge. Because in that particular case he held a few shares of the company which was one of the litigants in the case. And mind you, the observations of the House of Lords, it has been written in the judgment, not even for a moment we doubt that Lord Cottenham did not even remember that he was holding the share of the company, meaning thereby giving him complete certificate of integrity. They said no, he was not qualified to sit. And what is happening with us? We have a case where the frontal accusations is against the Chief Justice of India. And it is he who sits on the bench and decides whether he shall hear or he shall not hear. I filed a suit, I was telling Mr. Manorama, and in course of time I reached the Supreme Court, become the Chief Justice of India. And the poor defendant against whom I had filed the case lands up in appeal before the Supreme Court. Now he has no right to take his own judge. He cannot decide who will be his judge. Can I have the right to decide who will be my judge? Is this very difficult for all of us to understand? Why there is somebody who is defending, why there is somebody who is not defending? These fundamentals have to be very, very clear. I don't know how many of you have read the book named as Supreme Injustice, which was against the United States Supreme Court. A scathing attack on the independence and fairness of judiciary. In the case, famous case of Al Gore versus Bush, where it was people's opinion was that Bush had won by manipulating the electoral process. That book needs to be read by us. So this criticism has to be, the institution has to be able to, bear what happens with us. We have a comptroller and auditor general. He gives a report. We don't remember, we can't even count how many trillion of rupees that we have lost. I ask you a very simple question. I hold an auction for 4G. Mr. Ashok is not a very rich man, or not as rich as I am. He gives 1,000 rupees bid. I am richer than him, I make it 2,000 rupees. And Mr. Dwivedi, being the richest amongst all of us, he makes it 10,000 rupees. So he gets the award, and that's what our CAG wants. How will he recover his 10,000 rupees? Obviously from each one of us. Instead of 25% maybe per call, we may have to pay 25 rupees per call. Can the government not choose at what rate I will give, so that my people can afford making calls? Is it very difficult for our Supreme Court to understand? Though the Supreme Court said that we will not review the judgment of 2G, but I think as educated people we must know that ultimately a constitution bench has held that this conclusion which was reached in 2G case by the Supreme Court was not the correct law. Government cannot be bound down that in every case of disposal of national asset there must be an auction. That freedom is with the government, provided that the government takes that decision in the interest of the people. This is where we have to ultimately decide. Because I have recently seen, as has been seen by Mr. Ashok, the Facebook man being questioned by their Senate. And here the President of America says that we will not allow China to rape our economy. Please have heart. You are president of, you claim to be the strongest nation in the world. And is it the language that the President of a United States has to use against one of the another nation? Because there was a time when the United States was giving outsourcing work. Why? Because they wanted to spend their time in improvement of technology, etc., etc. Where their money spent? They spent that money in the war, as much as $14.2 trillion. And instead of developing their own infrastructure, what the American government did was, or American people did was, build the Wall Street and the share market in the world so that world economy can be controlled by us. And when it crashed and employment gone, everything gone. And you are holding others responsible for the kind of governance that you have given to your own country. So this is all debate, and this debate, as Mr. Ashok has correctly said, cannot be settled in one. I think the biggest takeaway from this will be that we do need a strong leader, we do need a strong institution, but at the bottom of everything remains that we have to have honest, meaningful, trustworthy leadership and an institution which inspire our confidence, be it media, be it legislature, be it executive, be it judiciary, be it social media, be it anything else. I have spoken far more than what I ought to have spoken, it's taken far more time than what you were willing to perhaps give me. I must therefore conclude, but before doing it, let me thank you from the core of your heart, the organizers, for giving me the privilege and honor of sharing my views and thoughts a little aloud with all of you. And ladies and gentlemen, I must thank each and every one of you in particular for being so generous and patient to me. Thank you very much.